Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story, the Wendigo story. Just posted this experience I had a few years ago in an Ask Reddit thread, and figured I would post it here for your thoughts. I'm not entirely sure if this was a Wendigo, or what I just usually refer to this as that since this took place not far from an Indian reservation in upstate New York. A few years ago, 2012 or 2013 I think, since I was still in high school then, I was at a party with some friends, and as the night goes on, maybe 11 to 12 at night, one of my friends and I go outside to have a cigarette. The second we get outside, there's just this completely awful, foul smell. Like just blood, vomit, piss, and death all at once. Now this was somewhat the middle of nowhere, so we just figured it was a dead animal, and went on with having that cigarette. Less than a minute later, we hear something moving in the dark, and sure enough, a deer comes hobbling into the very edge of the porch light. So we just mention, "Ah, how cute," and the like. But then I noticed something. One of its front legs was messed up in some way. And I'm talking like broken in multiple places, messed up. So my friend and I are slightly off-put by this, less than we should have been since drunk, and finish up our cig and go to head inside. However, right as we start to do that, one of the two porch lights goes pop and goes out. So now it's less light outside, and this deer is back into the darkness. So, a bit giddily, we both do this like fake scared squeal at each other and turn around to go inside. And that's when we heard it. That undeniable sound of nails on the concrete patio. We both slowly turn around to see this hunched over, rotten coyote doing this very slow, very unnatural crawl towards us. We go from 0-600 paralyzed with fear almost instantly until another one of our friends playfully pulls us through the open door, telling us to get back to the party. To this day, I have not experienced anything like that, and it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced. Second story. I believe I had a close encounter with something strange in Mendocino National Forest. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions, especially from someone with experience. Last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself, on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks/forests because it's isolated so my dog can roam, and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy/rough drives into the parks sometimes and lack of service/assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there. And I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continue to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there.
I hear men's voices.
They sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but then kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming from. I've never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself, and the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die. Glass gets broken. Nothing happened. Cool. But I remember this place. It sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year. I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination in this little event, lol. So my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 to 3 hours left, and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly says what they are, and casually mentions they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I have ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a Wendigo. He did. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange AF, and I start Googling Wendigos, etc., etc. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is, "Another family goes missing in Mendocino." And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing. And due to this day, my dog and I are very close. She was a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, those stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I have never had such a bad feeling. On top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seemed strange. I don't think I'll be doing more solo traveling unless it's around civilization, lol. Does anyone know about authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had bad vibes in Mendocino National Forest from a Wendigo. Third story, Evil Forest Spirit. This is a series of weird and creepy events that have happened to me and my mates across the past week and a half, and all came to a head last night. It's a pretty long story and it has a lot of detail, but I'll try to recall what happened as best as possible. Bear with it because it gets pretty creepy. So I'll preface this story with the fact that I'm traditionally not a very spiritual person. I have always been quite cynical of paranormal activity, and even though I know that there may be some things beyond our understanding, I've always believed that there's usually a very logical, scientific reason for most paranormal occurrences. Everyone in my friendship group also shared this vibe, until what happened the other night. So my mates, my boyfriend and I live on a uni residence which is surrounded by a dense Australian forest. I have been here for a year now, and have enjoyed going on multiple bushwalks both during the day and at night. I grown up surrounded by bush. My high school was on 200 acres of bush, and I live on a country property in the middle of nowhere, so at this point, the land and the forest have become my safe space. I have been in the uni forest plenty of times to take a breather from uni stress, and I have never noticed anything sinister in there. Over the past few weeks, my boyfriend and his mates have been building a pretty impressive fort in the bush. They have spent every free minute taking an axe to old dead logs and building this fort, which is about the size of a caravan. Understandably, they're pretty proud of this creation. So last night they decided to show some third years what they have been working on. As they were walking towards the fort, these third years stopped and told us they didn't want to go further. They told us that they had had some bad experiences in that section of the forest, and they told us they were too scared to venture in. It was also about midnight at this point, so it was very dark. I thought these third years were merely pranking us, so I began joking and making light of the situation. To my surprise, though, my boyfriend, Matt, and best friend, Darcy, were very accommodating of the third year's fear and told them they'd be happy to accompany them out of the bush. They oddly seemed kind of freaked out themselves. I then remembered that Matt had actually told me before that the bush could be quite scary at night, which actually amused me because usually he's the type of annoying, macho man who believes that fear is a sign of weakness. One of the third years, Nick, wanted to press on, but the other two, Kyle and Adam, wanted to head back. I had seen the fort a few times, so I volunteered to go back with Kyle and Adam. As we were leaving the forest, I asked Kyle and Adam what made them so scared of the forest. They told me they didn't want to talk about it when we were in there, but they did point out to me that the section of the forest we were in was unnaturally still and quiet. As a cynical person, I had to admit that it was a bit odd that only the section we were in was dead still, whereas about 20 meters away, across a road, the trees were blowing madly in the wind. Once we had left the forest, Kyle and Adam's demeanor changed significantly, and they finally felt comfortable expressing to me what they had experienced in the bush before. Very long story short, across the 3 years that they have lived on res, they, and a few other people, have had multiple encounters with what seemed to be an odd-looking spirit in the shape of a man in a hunched-over position. The spirit was always accompanied by the bush going unnaturally silent, and an overwhelming feeling of impending evil and doom. He told me that the reason the forest goes so still and quiet is because something inside of it is listening to you and hunting you. Kyle, being a man of indigenous culture, told me that at one point, the spirit was so close to one of his friends that he had to call in an Aboriginal elder to run a smoking ceremony. This elder told Kyle that the presence of evil was overwhelming in the forest, and she warned him never to go in too deep again. Kyle also begun educating me about other Aboriginal legends and expressing his fear of the noises, like screams and whistles, distinctly human screams and whistles, not foxes or birds, and the feelings he had experienced in the bush. At this point, I listening ardently, but was also viewing these stories as purely fictitious as opposed to something to be concerned about. Even though I didn't really believe in the stories, I was interested in learning more about the Aboriginal culture, and I was honored that Kyle was opening up to me about something which seemed to be very personal and significant to him. About half an hour later, Matt, Darcy, and Nick emerged from the forest and headed back over to us. As they approached, I could tell that they seemed pretty obviously shaken by something, and for the first time that night, definitely not the last LOL, I suddenly felt very anxious. Matt and Darcy explained that they were showing Nick the fort when they all suddenly felt an overwhelming feeling of dread, and they all unanimously decided that they needed to leave. Matt also admitted to momentarily catching a glimpse of what he said looked hunched-over man in front of a tree near the fort. He said he would have thought it was a shadow had he not seen the man's eyes reflect the light of his phone torch. At this point, my belief that they were pranking us diminished entirely as Kyle was visibly freaking out and Matt looked shaken. I could tell they weren't acting, and I also didn't believe Kyle would exploit his own culture for the sake of a cheap joke. We all now headed back to our respective dorms, as we figured we'd better get as far from the forest as possible. I felt much better to be inside, only until Matt turned me and suddenly said, "I need to go back and talk to Kyle." When I looked into his eyes, I could tell something was very wrong, and my anxiety amped up significantly. Him behaving this way was very unusual, and something was clearly bothering him. So we headed over to Kyle's unit and knocked on the door to his room. Matt explained to both of us that 2 days prior, he had come across a massive tree in a clearing that was covered in some odd sorts of bulbs. Him being an absolute moron decided it would be a clever idea to take an axe to the bulbs to see what they were made of. He admitted that the reason he was asking Kyle about it was because he couldn't shake the memory or thought of this tree, and it was becoming unbearable and stressful. Kyle was obviously furious about this, as it turned out that the tree Matt had damaged was very sacred and ancient, and Kyle believed that Matt might have angered the forest and the spirits within it. He asked Matt if he had experienced any incidents over the past few days, and Matt matter-of-factly told us that the gash on his face, caused by a falling branch that missed his eye by a mere cm, actually happened only 20 minutes after he axed the tree. He also told Kyle that he had lied when he initially told us he'd seen the hunched man for the first time tonight. He had in fact seen him 3 times over the course of the past week and twice in the past 2 days. He also told us that the reason he left the forest the night of axing the tree, besides the fact he had a bleeding cut on his face, was because all of the boys working on the fort had suddenly heard a very, very unilateral sound in the forest. Something between a human scream and a whistle. They said they would have thought it was an animal had everything else not suddenly gone completely silent. When they heard the noise again, closer this time, they grabbed their stuff and legged it. It was also at this point when I realized that over the past 2 days, and I could literally pin it to whenever Matt was around, I had felt extremely agitated and sad. It was a very intense feeling, and I felt really guilty because it was nothing Matt was doing to upset me that was causing my distress. It was as simple as it being his energy or his vibe that was bothering me. I love this man. We have never had any arguments, but the night after he axed the tree, which he didn't tell me about, and which I don't condone by the way, I remember feeling such a distinct feeling of discomfort whenever he was around me. It got so bad at one point that I locked myself in my room and cried all night about it. I was confused and sad that the person I loved was making me this distressed when he had seemingly done nothing wrong. I pinned it on my period, except that is not due for another week, and usually doesn't cause such emotional deregulation. I'm still not necessarily saying that the tree and Matt's energy were linked, but it was a feeling that was so weird to me and so unexplainable to begin with. So this almost made sense to me. Kyle now told Matt that he and I, and everyone else involved in making the fort, needed to get saged as quickly as possible to ward off any evil spirits around him. Matt, despite his initial disbelief, agreed immediately. We met with another Aboriginal student, Ash, and their partner, Key, and they provided the sage. Before the ceremony, Key told us that they were going to go gauge the vibes, and Ash told us that Key had an innate ability to feel spirits in the wind. The second that Key walked out of the unit, I swear to God that the wind did one of the weirdest things I have ever experienced. It was the biggest gust of wind so far, and it carried the faintest howl of about 5 different notes and octaves. It came from well beyond the tree-line like a wave and flew unnaturally quickly in our direction. It flew through me as if collecting my shadow, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't feel sinister though, and Key reassured us that it was a normal phenomenon and that they experience it whenever in touch with the spirits. What wasn't normal though was the smell that permeated in the air about 30 meters from the tree line. It was almost artificial and like nothing I'd smelt before, and it clearly scared Key as they began to tell us that something was very, very wrong. He told us that something was stalking us from just beyond the tree line and that it was very, very angry. Apparently, we needed to begin to sage now, or else it would follow us into the residence. As we walked to the glow of a nearby lamp post, he told us that it was too late and that the evil thing was already following us. And that was when the brand new, relatively expensive lighter we had recently brought broke. It just completely broke. We tried to light the sage and the button fell off and the thing cracked open. We now needed a new lighter, and Key told us that the thing was getting closer and closer. Whether it was related or not, I could not stop shaking despite being warm under a lot of layers of clothing. As a pack, we headed to a room to get a new lighter, and Ash advised us that Matt should stand away as we tried to light the sage. After a couple of attempts where the fire bent around the sage, and I mean literally was repealed by the stick, Matt stood far away enough and it lit. Once we all were fully saged, we were all feeling significantly better and were ready to sleep. It was probably about 2:30 a.m. at this point. I got back to Matt's room, now completely comfortable around him for the first time in 2 days, and we got into bed. The other 2 people in our room were already asleep and sleeping soundly. Matt and I talked for a while about random stuff, nothing ghostly, and I ended up feeling very comfortable and happy as we eventually stopped talking and he drifted off. As a bit of an insomniac, it takes me a while to doze off, so usually I go on my phone until I feel sleepy. That was when it happened. It started with a very faint tap that I paid not much mind to, but in hindsight didn't have a known source. Then the dogs from the suburb across from the uni went nuts. It was a very faint sound, but they were disturbed nonetheless. Nothing made me think that it was anything paranormal until multiple things happened at once. The room went very still and silent, as if a ward of cotton had replaced the air. The heater stopped. The faint noises of breathing stopped. Even Matt next to me was silent. And then my legs went icy cold, unnaturally cold. The rest of my body was warm, but legs were freezing. Then my whole body just as suddenly became uncomfortably hot. Initially, I was worried I was having a stroke or a heart attack or something. Finally, an all-consuming, overwhelming, intense feeling of evil permeated everything. It was evil and angry, and like nothing I had ever felt before. I couldn't link it to a specific spot in the room, but I knew it was strongest near Matt. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I knew it wasn't sleep paralysis because I had been on my phone the whole time and was not remotely asleep. I could also move freely and I didn't feel paralyzed. I sat bolt upright and felt a panic attack coming on. I'm usually not one to cry very easily, and I'm never one to have a panic attack, but this rendered me to both. I was sitting upright and praying with everything I could think of for this to go away. I was shaking and crying. I didn't want to wake the others to ask them if they could feel it because I knew that would anger it. I didn't end up needing to wake them though because Matt awoke suddenly with a start. It scared the life out of me because his voice cut the silence, but he was just asking if I was okay. I was not okay. The thing was now feeling more evil than ever. I couldn't speak. I just sat there more terrified than I have ever been in my life. Matt then went dead still and said to me, "You feel that, right?" I couldn't even nod. I was praying with everything I could muster. I'm not even religious, but I was calling on all the limited things I knew about religion, God, Jesus, angels, etc. I was repeating in my mind that I meant the thing no harm and that I'm sorry if I offended it. All I remember saying aloud is, "Something is very, very bad." And Matt just nodded, looking terrified. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime of prayers, the feeling began diminishing and everything slowly felt calm again. Noise returned, the breathing of the others in the dorm. The heater cranked on. The wind outside resumed. Whatever it was seemed to have left. Once I felt safe enough to lie down, Matt and I snuggled up together and tried our best to fall asleep. I was worried the thing would return when Matt fell asleep in order to attack him when he was vulnerable, but it didn't, thank God. My sleep was ridden with nightmares about spirits, and I woke up unusually early. In the morning, though, I seemed to feel okay. Matt and I talked, and he reckons we both were freaked out off the back of a really creepy night. What's weird, though, is that before that encounter, or whatever it was, I was not even remotely scared. To be honest, when I went to bed that night, I was still pretty skeptical there was even a spirit to begin with. Not that morning, though. I'm still convinced that it was a spirit in that room that night. I have never, ever felt anything like the fear I felt in that situation. I've watched horror movies. I've intentionally freaked myself out in creepy places before, and only that night did I feel any sort of presence. I can't entirely describe it. I asked Kyle, Ash, and Key that morning if we should be concerned about it visiting our room, and they told us that if whatever it was wanted to hurt us, it would have done so. They said they believe it was more of a warning for us to leave it alone, more of a threat than an act of violence. We also then discovered, as Darcy went back into the bush that day, Matt and I declined the invite, that their well-structured, carefully constructed fort that could carry the weight of all of them had collapsed in the night. It wasn't a stormy night. It wasn't any more windy than any other night had been. The fort had entirely caved in on itself, as if having been trampled on by a large creature. Whether these things are coincidental or not, I'm not sure, but it sure freaked me the hell out. I haven't had any odd experiences since, but I also haven't gone back into the forest since. I still don't know whether or not I want to. Fourth story. Don't go Christmas tree hunting after dark in northern Canada. When I was growing up, every Christmas we would go out hunting for a tree. The perfect one, just the right size to put up in our living room. It was always an excursion, going out into the countryside, crammed into the snow-covered car in our winter wear. My mom and dad, my brother Noel and I, the four of us were an unstoppable team, heading out into the white wilderness to find that one ideal specimen to hack down and drag home with us, so that we could decorate it in tinsel and cover it with ornaments, lights, and all the works. Every year it was our tradition, until one year it wasn't anymore. Dad passed away a couple years back, and with all this pandemic business, it doesn't look like we'll be doing much as a family this Christmas for the first time I can remember. It was with this feeling of melancholy and neglected nostalgia in mind that I hopped into my car on a whim and drove out into the snow-covered countryside to find a Christmas tree. The whole thing was a bit out of the ordinary for me, but I was feeling stir-crazy sitting in my apartment. I had just been quarantined for a week due to an exposure at work and had finally gotten back the negative test results and subsequent all clear to venture outdoors again. After days of Uber Eats, watching reruns and old Christmas movies, I could finally leave my house. I couldn't remember where the place was that we had gone to as kids, so I just drove around until I found a farm with a sign out front. It took a couple hours, but I liked that lost feeling, that sense of misdirection that none of us experience anymore since we all have GPS and cell phones. I had turned my phone off and put it in my glove box, vowing not to use it for the trip, instead just wandering until I finally found that sign I was looking for. Christmas trees, it read, $1.40 each, bring your own saw. Bios. Perfect, I thought, just like the old days. I pulled into the frozen gravel lot and parked. It was getting a bit late in the day, so the few people in the parking lot were already tying trees to the roofs of their cars or throwing them in the backs of pickup trucks. "Better hurry," said a man in a flannel shirt and overalls as I got out of my car. "Gets dark early nowadays. Don't want to be stuck out there after the sun goes down. Gets cold quick in these parts." I was immediately struck by his intimidating height. Being 6'5" myself, I don't often run into someone taller than me. He looked down at me, and I thought he had to be above 7 feet tall. His skin was stretched taut over prominent cheekbones, and he appeared emaciated and malnourished. "Thanks," I said. "I haven't done this since I was a kid. Hopefully I still remember how to work a hacksaw." He looked at me crooked for a second, then smiled in a slightly creepy way. His teeth were yellow and nicotine-stained. His eyes looked yellow as well, his skin rough and covered in sores. You never forget how to use a hacksaw. It's like riding a bike. But remember what I said about the darkness and the cold. You from around here? Yeah, more or less. Why? He watched me for another second, chewing a wad of something sticky and brown in his mouth as he did. "Just make sure you're back at your car by sundown. Lots of animals out, and not much to eat this time of year." "What kinds of animals?" "All kinds. Wolves, coyotes, other things too." I assumed he was the unstable owner of the place, and guessed by his comments that he was slightly insane. One of his eyes was looking at me, and the other was staring off into the distance. The parking lot was soon abandoned as all the other cars seemed to leave at the same time as I prepared to go out. Trudging through the snow, bundled up with my hacksaw in hand, I proceeded into the forest of Christmas trees, and he stood and watched me go. Near the parking lot, the trees were all too large to fit in my living room. It took a while to get into the decent ones, and I found a lot of the best specimens had been taken. This one had a hole the size of a basketball in the boughs. That one was already starting to turn brown and looked sick. Too small, too large, too skinny, too tall, too fat, wouldn't fit. Before I knew it, I realized I was having trouble seeing where I was going. The sun had been subtly setting behind my back. I tripped over something and fell in the snow. When I got up, my gloves were damp, and I realized my feet were starting to feel numb. It was suddenly getting very cold. Okay, I thought to myself, just pick one and get out of here. All of the trees looked sick and dying. I realized now. They were missing large sections, and none of them looked suitable for use. I settled on a random one after another couple minutes and quickly hacked it down with the saw. By the time I was done, it was pretty much completely dark outside. I thought again about the man's warning to return to my car before it got dark, and started to get nervous and wonder why he had been so insistent. Perhaps there are wolves, a voice in my mind said, or bears. Maybe there are Wendigos. Why did I have to think about that? As I walked through the knee-deep snow, dragging the sick-looking little tree behind me, I remembered what I had read about them. Wendigos were a creature first mentioned in Canadian First Nations folklore, and I had once done a project on them for school. I discovered through my research that a Wendigo is an evil, malevolent spirit. It is fueled by greed and loves the cold. It prefers its victims hungry, like those found in remote regions during winter months. It possesses people and causes Wendigo psychosis, a condition diagnosed by psychiatrists. Symptoms include cravings for human flesh. Those who are possessed want to eat people. For every person the creature kills and consumes, its gaunt and skinny frame grows taller, thus never feeling satisfied. It is towering in its height, thin and human-like, but motivated only by greed and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Wendigo tend to appear in the winter when food is scarce. They love the cold. They are drawn in by starvation and ice-cold freezing despair. My stomach rumbled with hunger. Snap out of it, I told myself. I thought I heard something. Footsteps in the snow behind me. I stopped walking and turned around quickly to look. No one. I began to walk again. The darkness was nearly total, but my eyes had adjusted enough not to trip as I trudged along through the deep snow, dragging the tree by its trunk. That was when I heard the sound again. Footsteps, closer this time. Movement of another person walking in the snow. I turned around and the sound stopped, but I had been sure that time. Someone was following me. Hello? I looked around, scanning the shadows in the direction where I had heard the noise. Is someone there? No one. Hesitantly, I turned around and began to march again, my thighs now numb from the cold. My toes had gone from a wet and frozen pins and needles sensation I associated with childhood tobogganing excursions to now suddenly feeling painful and dead. The temperature had plunged rapidly. I hadn't checked the forecast, but this seemed unnatural. It felt like it was minus 30 degrees Celsius. My breath plumed out in the air in front of me, and my hands began to shake involuntarily. Suddenly my teeth were chattering and I was having trouble walking, my legs not wanting to move. The sound was coming behind me again, much closer now. I turned around, and this time it didn't stop. It didn't try to hide. The thing coming at me looked very much like the man from the parking lot, but he was no longer human. Maybe he never was in the first place. His plaid shirt was torn, and it looked like he had grown taller than before, and was now pushing 8 feet. Jaundiced eyes full of hate and hunger stared at me as he raced towards me, his long legs making him move quickly in the snow. For a moment I was frozen there, in more ways than one. It felt like the closer he got, the colder it was, and if anything propelled me to escape from him, it was that. I didn't want to feel that freezing dread for 1 second longer. It felt like death. My heart racing, I dropped the tree and ran. The fear I felt as I raced through the snow was indescribable. Have you ever been so afraid that your body doesn't feel real anymore? Your muscle memory doing everything for you, telling your body to run, and you don't even have time to think. You just run. The problem is when there's an 8-foot-tall Wendigo chasing after you, and they're obviously hungry and fast as hell. That's when it doesn't matter how quick you can run, because you're still gonna die. I heard him gaining on me, and I knew if I looked back I would die. Just that brief momentary lack of focus would be enough to cause my demise. My heart skipped a beat as I felt it swipe at my clothing and nearly grab a hold of me, and I realized I would never get away by running like I was. I could hear its breath behind me, very close, breathing heavily as it ran. Headlights flashed suddenly, illuminating me, and I heard the Wendigo scream and duck away. The parking lot was to my left, I realized. I had reached it just as the creature was about to grab hold of me. It would have still if not for this one random person pulling into the parking lot. I heard the Wendigo running off back into the trees, clearly terrified of the light. My heart hammering, I walked towards the parking lot. I wanted to thank whoever was in the car, since they had saved me. Even if it hadn't been intentional, it had happened. Interestingly, the car looked familiar. I realized as I walked over to it. My older brother Noel rolled down his window, and the expression on his face revealed a total lack of surprise or any other emotion. "Noel, you saved me, man. Thank you." There was something chasing me out there in the woods. "A Wendigo?" he asked. "Yeah, how did you know? And how did you know I was out here?" "Mom told me you went looking for a tree, and there's only a couple places you can go these days. I got worried about you. Don't you remember what Dad always told us?" The memories started to flood back to me. I had forgotten what my father had warned us over and over again. No wonder the advice from the man in the parking lot had been so familiar. "Never go hunting for Christmas trees after dark," I said. "But what does that have to do with Wendigos?" "Man, think about it. Those guys love the cold, right? And they love when people are hungry. What are the two things you always remember feeling when we went looking for Christmas trees as kids?" My stomach rumbled again, louder this time. Why had I skipped dinner before coming out here? Point taken. My whole body is completely frozen solid, totally numb, and I'm starving. "Follow me," he said. "I'll drive to the nearest burger place and we'll get a bite to eat and get you warmed up." I got into my car with one last parting glance at the woods. Yellow eyes gleamed from the darkness. Maybe I'll get the veggie burger for a while. Fifth story. I think I may have seen a Wendigo. So this is very confusing, but bear with me. I was in my house with tea and a book. I have a large window seat on the second floor, and I was chilling right there. I have a small 2-story cabin in the woods. A long driveway, about a half-mile, leads down to the main road, not a highway, mind you. I enjoy taking hikes, hunting, fishing, and just enjoying nature in general. I was looking out into the forest to see if I could find any cool birds when I heard a noise. A rustle in the bushes brought my attention toward my neighbor's cattle pen. My neighbor's house can only be accessed by the same long road, and they have a farm with 3 cattle, 2 cows and a bull, 12 chickens, and 2 pigs. A large barn sits in the middle of all the pens. The bush rustled again. Thinking it was a bear, I was worried it would take one of the pigs and drag them into the woods. This has happened once already, sadly. I grabbed my old hunting rifle. I was going to attempt to fire the gun in the air and scare the creature. No reason to harm it. But what I saw made me think twice. I walked out onto my large back porch, fired in the air. The loud noise pierced my eardrums and chased me to flinch. The second the rifle fired, a dull reddish blur appeared, sprinting into the neighbor's pig pen. It got on all fours and grabbed the poor animal with its mouth, then sprinted back into the forest, with the swine clutched between its jaws. "Holy shit," I yell after seeing this. This is where it gets really bad. I sprint to my neighbor's house, gun in hand, waiting to tell him about the grisly abduction I just witnessed. I stopped about 50 feet from the house when I noticed the glass slider door was ajar, and a thick path of blood led from there to the barn. I didn't notice this before, because you can't see either the house or the barn from my house. It's covered in trees. The pig and cattle pens are right near the woods on their backyard, but the tree grove stops, so you can see them. Scared crapless, I tentatively followed the trail. When I reached the inside of the barn, I already knew what I would find. 2 skeletons lie in a haystack. Both were white and picked clean. Yelling bloody murder, I ran back to my house. I locked myself inside with my gun. Pelting rain and hail started coming down. Before the power went out, I watched the news channel, and apparently this storm would go on for 3 days, and it was a big one. Thunder and lightning crashed, and I tried to call the police. News channel blaring in the background. No service. Then the TV cut out. I went to bed and locked every door and window, grabbed my bow as well as my gun and my hunting knife. I finally made it through morning. I'm surprised I slept at all. When I woke up, I noticed something gleaming in the dirt of the pig pen through the pelting rain. A bone-white skeleton, and the other pig was missing. Blood adorned the trees and fence near the pen. I'm typing this on my phone, which is at 20% plus. I have no way to charge it. Does anyone know what this thing is? I need help. I will update tomorrow hopefully, if I conserve phone battery, and I'm not dead by then. 6th story. I think my mom was cursed by a Wendigo. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed to myself, making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mom, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain and forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 feet high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence. Beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting 1st grade, and what I'm about to tell of has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mom was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think they knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mom stayed back at the house to do paperwork for an ongoing custody battle. When she was alone, or when I was out of sight, was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard. Yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened, she wrote it off as her hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another, especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends out on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest and the valley. She would invite them over when I was at school still, so that she can focus of relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mom, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, as she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mom supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home, or find my mom if I was off inside the house, my mom would keep asking me if I was really at school today, and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mom had of an encounter with an unwelcomed friend on / around our property was one night in 2014. When I was in 4th grade, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county, and she was literally shaken awake. Note: the bedroom we were sleeping in had the bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up, but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully, we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handyman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset. To keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat chickens, along with a metal fenced, not the chicken wire kind but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, coop on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions since a few were recently spotted north the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. At first it was just one chicken that ended up drowned at the bottom of our pool. After that we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then one late morning I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mom, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, look at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open and inside the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chicken are eaten or missing. Their heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbors or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remember most was not the dismembered chickens, but the smell of rotting flesh, even though the chicken looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back, it felt like we were being taunted by this thing. Or at least my mom was for some reason. When we still lived at that house, and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mom got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer, and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by the Wendigo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion as she was low risk in getting breast cancer, let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house, of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if these reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She had hoped it was something good and not malevolent. In fact, it did have my voice after all. Last year in the fires, the house burnt down, and this year in the spring, my mom passed away. Looking back, it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing, or maybe there was no supernatural explanation, but it still lingers in the back of my mind. 7th story. I believe what I saw was a Wendigo. "Hello, Dr. Sebastian, I would like to speak with you." That is what a cold voice said to me over the phone. The voice then explained that there was a family who needed food to be delivered to them, and I then asked why she asked me an astrophysicist. She then replied with, "We would really like you to deliver, or at least purchase food for them." I could not say no, so I asked her for the location of the family. She gave it to me, and I decided to ask the family what they want when I arrived. I then drove to the location, parked my truck, and entered the small wooden house. When I entered, I got a chilling feeling in my spine. I then drew my firearm and walked slowly while calling for someone. It was pitch black within the house except the small amount of light entering the house through the curtains. I then walked into their kitchen, and that is when I froze in fear. There it was sitting with its legs crossed, looking at me. It was as tall as me sitting, and I'm around 6 feet 5 inches in height. It had long talons, it was skinny, its skin was gray, and its eyes were almost as white as light, but far less bright. I could see its rib cage, and then it spoke. It said in a child's voice, "Hello, Dr. Sebastian. How are you?" I screamed like a Viking in the midst of war and shot it 8 times in the heart. Its scream sounded like an Aztec death whistle. I ran back to my truck and left. I knew that thing is what I spoke to, and I knew if I were to tell my friend, he would show up with his entire team, and they would have been turned into its dinner. That is all I can remember. But the way it looked at me screamed, "I have ascertained your soul, and there is nothing you can do about it." I visited the location 2 years later with my mates. The place was in a horrible state. The wall had scratch marks, there was urine everywhere, and the only thing we could smell was the urine and blood. As I stepped into my apartment, I got a weird feeling. My roommate then greeted me. She asked me what I had done, and I told her that I went with her brother and our friends to an old cabin. 2 hours later, while I'm trying to sleep, I hear a tapping noise. It was coming from my window, and I knew something was wrong. My apartment is on the 2nd floor. There are no trees for at least 10 to 20 meters, and most trees in the area are short. I did not even dare to move, and then my roommate came into my room. "CB, do you have toothpaste? Because I have run out," she said. She then looked at the window, and the tapping speed increased. "Don't move," I said. After 2 hours, the sound stopped, and we both slept in the living room. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.